We're going to call to order this meeting of the Hamilton County Board of County Commissioners, December 12th, 2019. Thank you all for being here. We've got a couple of public hearings today and then our regular agenda. Before we get started, we'll make introductions. Jackie Paniotto is to my right here on the dais. I'm Commissioner Denise Driehaus, Vice President to the Commission. Stephanie Summerall-Dumas is to my left. To her left is County Administrator Jeff Aludo, and Legal Counsel Michael Friedman is at the end of the dais. We start our meetings with silent prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance, so please stand if you can. Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I'm going to move that we approve of the minutes of the previous session.
Second.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, I've got a few speakers' cards. I've got one for one at the first public hearing. I've got one for the second public hearing. Thank you. And I've got one unrelated, I think, to an agenda item. So before we get to that, I'm going to make another motion to excuse Commissioner Portune.
Second.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so Nick Tobert, where is Nick? please come forward. You've got the pleasure of the floor for 2 minutes. Welcome.
Hello. It's my first trip down here. I'm going to try to make this brief because I'm a long talker. I'm trying to get this thing off in 2 minutes. It's going to be difficult. My company wrote the resolution that passed here in Cincinnati to recognize the indigenous people that was here before Columbus. The city passed it. It failed the first time, but we gave them some solid, good facts. What we're looking to do is to plant the seed to eliminate racism. It can be done. Why? Because it didn't exist before Columbus. It didn't. The only thing they fought over was land, food, and women. That's the only thing they fought over. That was it. And so what we're going to do, and we found out how they live together, and we're going to put it out there. We're going to plant this seed because it can be done. If you ain't tired of talking about racism, there's something wrong with you. Really. I'm sick of it. And we could do that. In Cincinnati, I already did it. They passed that resolution. And guess what? Columbus jumped around and did the same thing. Boom. Just like that, following us. And they're going to keep following us because that's what we're going to do. We're going to stop in this city fighting about racism because they're going to learn true history. And I just want to make this statement right here. And I say this all the time. The fight between the North and the South, over 70% of the people that fought in that war was white. Okay? There was a Chinese bloodline that fought in that war too. And black bloodline. You know why they fought? Because they came together. That whole thing about Thanksgiving, that was because of Lincoln. He brought them all together. That's why he's sitting on a throne today. So I just want to say that, and I'm hoping that I can bring you guys together to work with me, because I'm going to be going over to the Museum Center. They got an exhibit that they're putting together about the indigenous people. We want to join them and give them more history about everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could provide us with the language that you provided to the city,
Yeah.
that would be helpful.
Oh, that'd be great.
Thank you. And I
All
don't,
right,
I don't think I have any staff members in the room, but Victoria's there. Okay. Thank you, Victoria, for following up. All right. The other speakers' cards I have are related to the public hearings, so I'm going to hold on those for a second. We'll move to comments and motions of commissioners. Commissioner Somero-Dumas.
Thank you, Madam President. I have no comments today. I'll save them for the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. I just have two. One is that I'm going to remind everybody that the census is hiring. We're going to do this at every meeting. If anyone is interested in a job with the census, primarily the folks that are going door to door to make sure we have a complete count, the website is 2020census.gov/jobs. They're good-paying jobs, flexible hours, and so if anybody would like to apply or know of anybody that would like to apply, the time frame is in the summer, and so if you know a teacher that might want to do this during the summer, please do encourage them to go to the census website. And then my second by leave is that I wanted to mention the naming of the music venue that took place yesterday. Andrew J. Brady Icon Music Center was unveiled, and Andrew J. Brady was a music instructor and the band leader over at West High on the west side of Cincinnati, and the Schiff family contributed dollars for the naming rights and then named it for a teacher that they had over at Western Hills High School. It was really a very moving ceremony, and we are very excited to have that thing up and moving and expected to be open fall of 2020, which is right on time. So just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. Jeff Aludo, you do have a by leave item, right?
I do.
Okay.
So one by leave and one just comment update on an issue as well. So the one by leave is budget adjustment number 44 in your packets. It is $300,000 for 2019 retirement payouts and transfers for the clerk of courts and prosecutor. So if you flip to the detail on this, the first is $150,000, actually $300,000 in vacation and sick pay. This is just to ensure that our retirement payout budget towards the end of the year is adequately funded. So as we just don't often know how many retirements we're going to get at the beginning of a year or at the end of a year. This makes sure that to the degree we have retirements, we're able to make those payouts in accordance with state law and county policy. So it's not a specific number. We might not pay this amount. We just need to make sure there's money in the account as people retire to make the payouts. There's also a transfer for the clerk of courts. This is within budget. It's just a transfer between line items in the clerk of courts budget. There's also a transfer within a grant fund to pay for contractual services in the heroin task force within the prosecutor's office, again, within a grant fund. That's not the general fund. The administration recommends approval if there's no questions.
All right. Are there any questions or comments?
Madam President, and I'll keep saying this, I'm just now seeing this. And even though it's a no-brainer that we have to put money in the account so people can get paid for retirement, if I can please see this stuff ahead of time, that would be great.
Understood.
All right, thank you. So I am going to make a motion then to approve a budget adjustment number 44, $300,000 for 2019 retirement payouts and transfers for the clerk of courts and the prosecutor.
Second.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. Secondly, just an update on an item. Several weeks ago, I talked about the status of our efforts with the dog warden and the SPCA. I just wanted to provide a brief update to the board on that. I've briefed offices individually, but likely next week, we'll be bringing forward an agreement to extend, to do a short-term extension into 2020 with the SPCA to allow us to begin transitioning those services over the course of over the initial portion of 2020. The transition agreement will allow for the separate transition of both patrol and enforcement services and kenneling and sheltering services. So we may not be in a position to transition both of those lines of work at the same time, but the transition agreement will allow us over the first part of 2020 to do both. I would anticipate transitioning patrol and enforcement services over to the sheriff, qualified by a final review of the sheriff's proposal with the board, and documenting the cost implications of that agreement in the earlier part of 2020, and transitioning the shelter and kenneling portions of the agreement later on in the year. We are also beginning the process, as the board is aware, of working with a citizen advisory group that's going to help us with operational questions as we take a more direct in-house approach to the management of this function. We want to make sure that we have a group of folks interested in this matter that are helping to advise us as we take this on in 2020 in a more direct way. From an operating cost perspective, I don't, at this point, anticipate large swings in the spend one way or the other. On an operating basis, obviously, we have some capital decisions we have to make. We've had in our capital improvement plan for the past several years, we have had a planned project related to potential capital needs of the kennel itself. Obviously, that will be a question that we vet with the board in the early part of 2020 as we vet options for how we go about taking over those services. But I just wanted to provide the board with a brief update on, let you know there would probably be action coming next week that will take us into a transitioning period in early 2020.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to move into the public hearings. The first on the agenda is the hearing to consider Zone Case Green 2019-08, Glenway McDonald's PUD request BCC appeal of a rural zoning commission approval of a planned unit development in an F light industrial district. Oh, very good. You're already. So Brian Snyder is here to give us an overview of this project.
Sure. Brian Snyder, zoning administrator, Hamilton County. This is a little different than the zoning cases that come before you typically. This is an appeal of the Zoning Commission's administrative decision to approve a planned unit development. It's not a very strange process. It's laid out in the zoning resolution. It just doesn't happen very often. So this commission is now acting as an appeals board to the decision by the Zoning Commission. The appeal was requested on behalf of McDonald's. The planned unit development that was approved by the Zoning Commission allowed for the redevelopment of the existing McDonald's on Glenway Avenue in Green Township. This is the existing building here. The proposal was to tear this building down and replace it with a new McDonald's building, as shown on this approved preliminary plan for the planned unit development. Obviously, McDonald's is not upset that their plan was approved by the Zoning Commission. However, it was approved with conditions. One of the conditions of approval required that the existing freestanding sign for the McDonald's be made to comply with the requirements of the zoning resolution. Staff reviewed this request as part of the PUD staff report, identified that the sign is approximately 33 feet tall, which is greater than the 28 feet allowed by the zoning resolution. It also appears to be larger than the 150 square foot size maximum for signs in the zoning resolution, although no definite size was given by the applicant. The request was to leave the sign as is and replace everything else on the site. Staff reviewed the planned unit development and reviewed the entire site as is laid out in the zoning resolution for planned unit development review. Identified that the sign was not compliant with the zoning resolution and recommended that it be made to comply. So basically either removed or modified to comply with the size requirements of the zoning resolution. The Green Township trustees submitted a recommendation as part of the PUD. They also recommended that the sign be made to comply with the zoning resolution, and the zoning commission heard both of those recommendations along with the objections of the applicant that they wanted to keep the sign as is. The zoning commission included a condition that required the sign to be modified to comply. So the purpose of the appeal by the applicant is to remove the condition requiring the sign to comply from the approval of the zoning commission. This commission has the authority to do that. That's the purpose of the appeal process as laid out by the zoning resolution. There are a number of standards in the zoning resolution. I tried to briefly cover those in the summary recommendations that I've provided. The applicant is indicating that the sign should be covered by the nonconforming use provisions of the zoning resolution. Nonconforming uses are things that existed either prior to zoning or prior to a standard of the zoning code that made them become non-complying. In this case, the zoning resolution was rewritten in 1996. The sign became non-complying at that time. It's a legal non-conforming use up until the point when the applicant voluntarily applied for planned unit development approval. Planned unit development process is not required. You can develop your site in accordance with the zoning resolution if you choose. If you voluntarily apply for a planned unit development, you understand that you bring your site into complete review of the zoning resolution. That's explained during the preliminary meetings that we have with any applicant before they apply. Non-conforming provisions are lost at the time when you voluntarily seek PUD approval. And that is the way that the zoning resolution has been administered since 1996 when commercial PUDs were created. The purpose of commercial PUDs is to review sites, older commercial sites, for things like lack of landscaping in the interior of the parking lot, lack of buffering for neighbors, and signage. These are the specific reasons that the commercial PUD was created. And also the specific reasons that nonconformities are deemed to be lost when you voluntarily apply for a planned unit development. The applicant's attorney has indicated that they feel that the nonconforming use provision should still apply and that they should have a right to keep the sign. There are a number of standards in the zoning resolution for review of planned unit developments. The zoning commission consider those. We consider those in our staff recommendations. You have the authority to consider those as well. If this commission feels that the sign is consistent with the intent of the PUD review, this commission has the authority to approve the sign, to remove the condition from the zoning commission's recommendation if you so choose. Our only concern as staff, really, other than our recommendation against the sign from the original recommendation, our only other concern is that allowing the nonconforming use argument to be the reason for removing the condition would jeopardize the intent of the planned unit development, both going forward and for the 50 or 60 commercial planned unit developments that have been approved since 1996, many of which included similar conditions regarding signage. So it's fairly complicated. I apologize, it's a long presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Okay. I don't have any questions at this time. Do you have any questions?
I'd like to hear additional comments.
Yeah,
if
me
you have
too.
any. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. Stand by, please. So we've got a speaker's card on this. It's Tom Tepe. Please come forward. Got the pleasure of the floor for 2 minutes. Welcome.
2 minutes, that's a short amount of time to try to protect property rights. Thank you. I have the pleasure to represent McDonald's Corporation here, who is the appellant. We don't disagree with anything that Brian had said. I don't think there's any facts in dispute whatsoever. This is an interpretation of this county's zoning resolution and the words that it chose to incorporate when it adopted it back in 1996. The only issue that we're talking about here is the sign. You might think it's a bit trivial, but McDonald's is extremely protective of its signs. It's one of the most recognized symbols in the world. It's been referred to as iconic, and they try to protect these everywhere they can. Any suggestion that the non-conforming status of this sign was lost or waived is inaccurate, because our plans from day one said sign is not to be altered or changed at all. The argument that you've heard that this is the way we've been doing it, and so therefore that's the way we're going to keep doing it, well, people run for office on trying to change the way things were done that they don't necessarily think are correct. And I can tell you, we believe the zoning code, and we've set this forth in our November 13 letter, we believe the zoning code is very clear that the sign stays. We don't believe that we've waived any rights by submitting to under a PUD. We are very clear that it's to remain. You have to look at your non-conforming sign section. And there's a couple of standards here that are referenced. The modification, it says, this is under the PUD section, the specific requirements in this capital R resolution, which is a zoning resolution, for lot areas, et cetera, signs, shall apply to all planned developments. It says the specific requirements in this resolution. Your resolution has an entire section, 13.43, devoted to non-conforming signs. Okay? So we maintain that our sign does conform to the resolution. These are the words that you chose. And it's good, and it's important that you listen to the one that I emphasize, which won't be hard because I'll emphasize it. May I continue on, please, Madam?
Be a couple more minutes.
Thank you. It says, this is the resolution titled Non-Conforming and Non-Complying Signs. Legal non-conforming signs may only be removed where the size is increased, it's relocated, it's replaced, or damaged greater than 70%, except by act of God. May only be removed. That's the words that this commission predecessors chose. We believe I don't think Mr. Snyder will say any of these things have happened. We believe we meet the resolution that the sign should stay. It's a property right. At best, there's a conflict in your zoning code. At best, there's a conflict in your zoning code. And I'll use such things that Mr. Friedman can appreciate. Ohio black letter law says that where there's an ambiguity in a zoning code or a zoning resolution, because you're dealing with constitutionally protected property rights, if there's an ambiguity in a zoning code or interpretation, it must be interpreted in favor of the free use of land and to the benefit of the property owner. We use the analogy, tie goes to the runner. The runner in this instance is the property owner. We believe the code is clear, we meet it. At worst, there's a conflict. He says that this one applies, we're saying this one applies. You, as the judge, has to decide. And if you think that there's a conflict or it's inconsistent, McDonald's wins.
Got you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anybody here from Green Township that would like to weigh in on this? No? Okay. So that's all. Those are all the speakers' cards I have related to this hearing. We've got a couple of options. One would be to continue the hearing, continue to look at the information. The other is to close the hearing and ask for a resolution to come forward. I'm not quite there yet. So if there's no other comment, I would like to continue this hearing to next week and have us render. Well, what is the timing on this? Is there a timing element that we need to be concerned about?
There's not, no. You have the ability to continue it for as long as you'd like.
Is there a timing element related to the development or what's happening on the site with the new McDonald's building?
I would assume that they would like to get it approved as soon as possible, but there's not a legal requirement for you to act in any certain amount of time. You have the ability to continue it to get as much information as you need to make your decision.
Okay. Or the other option would be to close the hearing and bring forward both resolutions, and then we make a decision at that point to get this finished out by the end of the year. What is your preference?
I would like to defer to the two resolutions and close the hearing.
All right.
And also, Madam President, I was just wondering, your reservation or what clarity were you thinking that you needed on this?
I want to take a better look at the language.
Okay.
If that's the case, I would suggest not closing the public hearing, just in case you have any questions that you would like answered at the time when you
all right.
get a chance to review it.
Let's continue the hearing to next week and then have the resolutions prepared just in case we're ready to act at the meeting next week.
Okay.
Okay? It's an evening meeting.
In this room?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And I would also like to touch base with Green Township to get some input from them. So, okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Reach out to
We
Green
have to
Township
vote
and
on
see.
that, continuing the hearing.
Well, yeah, I'll move that we continue the hearing till the meeting next week,
Okay,
Thursday.
second,
Yes.
yes.
Thank you. All right, our second hearing is related to the MSD budgets that are in front of us. Interim Director Diana Christie is here, as well as the MSD team, so thank you for being here. We've got a lot of information in front of us, so if you could walk us through this issue. I do have a number of speakers cards related to this issue, and we'll get to the speakers after the presentation by MSD. Thanks, Diana.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss MSD's 2020 operating and capital budget requests with the board and with the public that is here today. As you know, as manager and operator of the sewer district, it's our duty to prepare these budgets for your review and approval. These budgets request the necessary funds to allow our dedicated staff to perform their essential duties of collecting and treating wastewater, to protect the environment and public health by returning clean water to local rivers and streams. The budget books that have been, I believe there are some copies here today. I also prepared excerpts in a very brief handout. There's just the few things that I wanted to talk to rather than have you flip through the book. But that same information is on relevant pages of the budget book, with the operating budget in particular.
Let me just clarify
Yes.
before you move forward. So we're in the middle of a public hearing process related to these budgets. This is the first of two hearings. We've got one today, we've got one next week on Tuesday, with the expectation that we pass something next Thursday at our formal meeting. So that's kind of the lay of the land. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and also along those same lines, these budget requests were shared with county administration. The operating budget request, we began in August 15th with the draft provided to the county, and the capital budget request in early November. And we've been working closely with the county administration and the county team that works at MSD on both of the operating and capital budgets to address one another's concerns. And through that process and the continued effort of our team, we did make some adjustments to the operating budget from August to November 27th. Those adjustments initially amounted to about $3 million. And then since that time, we have been continuing to work together and trying to refine the budgets even further. So I'll get into the details of those in both the operating and capital budgets in just a moment. We also, though, prepared and submitted legislative requests consistent with the requirements of the 1968 Management Agreement, recommending that this board take the necessary actions to approve the budgets, set the rates, and appropriate funds for 2020. Those legislative requests and the budgets have been made available through our website for public review prior to this hearing. And so for ease of reference for everyone, I'm using the budgets that we had presented and put on our website, although, as I will mention, we have identified some additional refinements since that time. So the budget totals are from the date the public hearing notice was submitted. I'll begin with the operating budget, and in particular, the handout that you have, I just identified some highlights of our operating budget on the second slide. This just is identifying that this budget reflects these key items and more. In particular, in 2020, we have new wet weather facilities we're operating. We continue and would like to continue with the sewer condition assessment and cleaning efforts. There's critical infrastructure and software tools that we're seeing and have increased needs for, as well as ongoing professional services that facilitate the implementation of technical and regulatory needs. And as in prior years, our operating budget begins, the development of our operating budget begins very early in the year, and it is under the leadership and supervision of our CFO, Ehab Tadros. And I would like to just take a quick moment. Ehab is here today, and I just want to point out for the last 5 years, he has led this process and done an excellent job. And tomorrow is his last day with MSD in the city, so we are bidding him farewell. And I would just want to assure everyone, though, that we're in trusted hands. Beverly Ingram, who is not here, who is our division manager for finance and accounting, will be with us. And we have Tiffany Lawrence Glenn sitting with Ehab today, learning everything she can about the budget because she's taking this on. So going forward, I know that will be in good hands, but Ehab's been a great person to work with, and I want to thank him for his tireless dedication to this budget process. He really does a great job, so thank you, Ehab.
So let me interject for just
Sorry.
a second, because your reputation extends past the city and into the county, and we've had a terrific working relationship with you. So thank you for everything that you've done for the city and the county to move forward with these MSD projects and get us square with our budget. So thank you so much for your service.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I will now get into the details of the budget. So if you would, if you want to turn to page 2 of that handout, and this is information that is also identified on pages 6 and 7 of the operating budget book. The operating budget that was presented for this hearing and that is before you today requests a total of $229 million for personnel and non-personnel services for OTEA, which is the Office of, the Technology and Equipment, SBU program, fleet overhead, and debt services. So that is the total request. That total request is actually a 0.4% decrease from the 2019 approved operating budget, generally because of the decrease in the debt service payment for 2020. As I have mentioned, we did make adjustments. What you have today represents a $3 million reduction from the initial draft submitted in August. And since that time, we have worked closely with the county team and just earlier this week discussed additional reductions in the operating budget that amount to another $2.6 million. I will explain the specifics as to how we could get there, but that brings the total request down to $220 million. And I did share with you a draft handout that looks like this that can walk you through those additional adjustments. As in years past, the county administration did share a target budget with us and asked that MSD maintain its current level of funding with a small increase to address rising costs and inflation. And MSD, I can assure you that we have worked very hard and taken that budget into account. But we did build our budget from the existing needs of the utilities and identified some of the new needs and requirements that we have going into 2020. As you know, our system is aging, and in addition, we are adding facilities and assets through the capital improvement program, and therefore our operating needs continue to increase. If I'd like to point out, or I'd like to focus in on the amount of the budget that is the personnel and the non-personnel only, so excluding the debt services and the SBU. And if you look at the slide, the handout I shared on this, as you can see, the non-personnel and personnel portion of the budget do make up about 60%, and the debt payment in SBU is separate for purposes of focusing on the portion of the budget that the county set a target for. So the request that we had for the hearing today was $126.8 million, and that can be broken down first for a personnel expenditure of $62.4 million. That was up $4.7 million, or about 6.4% from 2019. This was prior to any additional discussions this week. That personnel increase is primarily due to an increase of about $1.2 million in healthcare, about $900,000 in cost of living, and then an additional increase for staffing to fund additional positions that are on MSD's table of organization but have been held unfunded for the past several years. So I'd like to briefly explain why we are proposing the need for increased staffing. There are additional positions that have been identified as it relates to the new treatment facilities that have come online, including the wet weather facilities that are built pursuant to the wet weather program, and to address ongoing regulatory compliance needs in the facilities. We've also identified through a working alone policy to address safety in the city operations. We've addressed critical areas where we may have personnel working alone when it is not recommended. In particular, we have significant understaffed maintenance crews, and due to that, our operations and maintenance staff are running a much higher than industry standard backlog for maintenance. So to give you some numbers on that, the needs for so by industry standards, we should have a standard backlog to address maintenance work orders of about 2 to 4 weeks per person. MSD is actually running a 10 to 12 week backlog per person. What that equates to is more reactive maintenance in our plants and facilities, which is also causes greater overtime and operational downtime at the plants. Some of the other positions, as I mentioned, will address high-risk safety needs identified over the last several months and the new facilities. In the budget book on pages 20 to 24, we have a particular description for about 25 positions that have been identified. And I'd just like to highlight a few of the examples. One is the need for a plant operator. So we have a new facility, Fort Scott. It is a Class 2 wastewater treatment facility that came online in 2019. By code, we are required to have an operator of record present for a minimum of 5 days and 20 hours per week. In order to cover that, we assigned an operator from our Mill Creek facility, which then resulted in a gap in the Mill Creek facility, which requires more overtime and existing personnel, and at times, operational downtime at the facility. One of the positions was a substation maintenance technician. This position fills an essential need for heavy electric crews to address the numerous overdue electrical preventative maintenance and high-risk heavy electric issues for our treatment facilities on the east, west, and central sections. Over the last few years, there have been near-miss electrical incidents, and this has been a safety priority. And just recently, we have actually had electrical outages at our Mill Creek facility, including the administrative offices, where we've had power outages. They typically only last about an hour, and we do, of course, have generators for the critical equipment. But these power outages are not on Duke's end. These are within our plant and due to our own aging systems. We've also requested plant maintenance specialist positions. These are needed to address the growing number of wet weather facilities maintained by our watershed operations staff, in addition to the existing shortfall in staffing MSD's pump stations. Again, this is related to preventative maintenance requirements of pump stations, and these exceed the currently available staffing due to the critical nature of our pump stations, and again, many of the aging assets that continue to see more downtime. So I want to be clear that MSD does not anticipate filling all vacancies in any given year. In 2019, for example, we had 640 positions with approved funding on our TO. However, we have had a personnel budget due to a vacancy credit that would have only funded about 600 to 605, which is what we carry at present. And I can respond to or discuss more things on the positions, but I think I'm going to move on to non-personnel in the interest of time, unless there's specific questions at this time. So for our non-personnel portion of the budget, and this, if you would like to refer back to the handout, I included the non-personnel request by division on slide 4. And there you can also see our total request. I might have missed a header there, but the total request for non-personnel for 2020 is $57.1 million, which is up just about $2.9 million from 2019. And this is about a 5.5% increase in our non-personnel. And as you can see by the figure there, the bulk of the non-personnel, with the exception of debt payment, is in our wastewater treatment and our wastewater collections division. So this is our operating section of our operations. So wastewater treatment, there is a non-personnel increase of about $2 million. So that's the bulk of the increase over 2019. And the following slide shows the breakdown of where the non-personnel costs come from for wastewater treatment. And in particular, the increases in 2020 are due to increases in utility costs In particular, we have a rider from Duke Energy that is going into effect. That's about $400,000. We have increases in disposal and hauling of our waste, which is about a 5% increase. Increases in cost of chemicals, mechanicals, and supplies. We have a critical upgrade to our software that is used for all of our maintenance and asset management work. And we have a cost that is a triennial testing for our incinerators. That's a professional services cost in the amount of $200,000. So those are all costs that are hitting 2020 that we did not see in 2019. For non-personnel costs for collections, the other one that primarily is driving this increase, those are due to increases in the costs of professional services that are used to do the condition assessments of our sewers. So we do condition assessments of our sewers to determine the risk and the criticality of any failure and to determine where we have to do repairs, rehab, and maintenance. We have a highly specialized technology that we can use with laser and sonar to do that, and so that is done through contracted work, and it hits the non-personnel line. In 2020, we are really trying to start to get ahead of the work that we have to actually assess all our sewers. So of our 3,000 miles of sewers, there's over 1,000 that have not been inspected via industry standard to date. We would like to schedule these, we do schedule these based on risk rates, so extreme high risk, and so on. And MSD wants to schedule additional work and also just the cost of the needed condition assessments to really get ahead of those backlogs of the condition assessments. We also have increased costs in wastewater collections for mechanical tools, testing, and supplies. And one area in particular is we are trying to install more float level indicators in our system in order to investigate and respond to sewer backups and overflows. So again, that's primarily what is driving the increases in 2020 between the personnel and the non-personnel. The other divisions are either even from 2019 or their increase is less than 1%. All of that information is in the budget book in much greater detail by division, but those were the two I wanted to highlight for today. Again, the budget for the operating budget also includes SBU. We have carried over the same $9.6 million that we used in 2019. Although this is unpredictable, it's our understanding that as our needs increase throughout the year, that we would come to the board and report on that fund and whether or not additional funding is necessary. As you recall, in 2019, we did come back to the board and get an additional appropriation of SBU funds, primarily in relation to the increasing costs for the sewer backup prevention program. The other non-personnel costs include the general fund overhead, our fleet, and then our OTEA capital equipment. For fleet, we provided a detailed report of the needs for replacement of our fleet in 2020. This begins on page 80 of the operating budget. This is one area where we have discussed an additional reduction in order to meet the county's budget target. We had a slight increase over 2019 carried in our budget based on just the actual needs of our aging fleet and some of the larger equipment. If we do not complete those in 2019, they would just be deferred. I'm sorry, in 2020, they would just be deferred again. So eventually, we have a schedule of replacement needs, and that's all detailed in the budget book. If we reduce that by another $800,000, it would be the same as it was in 2019. Same thing for the capital, the OTEA. We had a justification for the expenditures for 2020 based on our known needs for replacement of those and purchases. If we reduce that by about $800,000, that's a no increase over 2019. So those are not reflected in the budget book that you have today, but those are things that we discussed and we presented in this adjustment to get us down just a little closer. And in summary, we're proposing an operating budget. Again, we were proposing an operating budget of $22.9 million, which is 0.4% less than the 2019 budget. And if I could, I would quickly turn to capital. Or do you want to wait?
Hold for a
Okay.
second. Administrator Aludo, I don't know who from the county team would like to lend some county perspective to the budget that was just presented to us by way of the operating budget.
Yeah, so if we want to just hit these one at a time, I would ask Holly to just come up and provide some brief.
Yeah, I'd prefer to
county-
just
Yeah,
deal with
that's
the operating first, and then we'll move to the CIP. Thank
Good
you.
afternoon, thank you. Before I start, I do want to thank again Ehab. I've only worked with him for, I think, 3 weeks maybe? And it's been an actual delight. I wish you all the best. So to just provide some additional context, as Interim Director Diana Christie mentioned, MSD's operating budget does consist of 3 parts, as she mentioned: debt service, SBU, and the operations and maintenance budget. The O&M budget funds MSD's day-to-day operations, which is where the county has typically honed its efforts, because there could be some opportunity to reduce costs in those line items. The debt service will vary from year to year and is considered a standalone requirement. And also, as Diana mentioned, the SBU portion is funded each year based on anticipated need. So I think Diana mentioned in 2019, the utility operated at a budget of $117.5 million. We did, as is every year, provide a budget target to MSD back in May. That was $119.8 million. However, having had numerous conversations with MSD and the county team over the past several weeks, we've had good conversations on some discretionary versus non-discretionary funding, and I applaud MSD for their openness and willingness to talk through those with us. Had we had a lot of that information back in May, we have revised that target to, we would have revised that target to about $121.4 million. As MSD mentioned, they did submit an operating budget of $129.9, just to walk through the timeline. And then subsequently, we did receive a supplemental increase to $130.9 million. Since that time, though, and I think you all are aware, we have worked, the county team has worked, and they're all, I don't know why, sitting in the back of the room, worked very diligently, collaboratively with MSD to try and bring that number more in line with the county target. And that is what we are today, what Diana mentioned, a proposed reduction from 130.9 of a high to 124.2, which is where we are today. And I can't reiterate enough, working with the county monitoring team has been a delight. It's my first year working on this project. Their knowledge has been just outstanding. And I also want to thank MSD's efforts to really help us get more in alignment between the city and MSD on a budget that we can ideally agree to for the operating. So from the administration standpoint, we are at a point where we feel we are close to MSD, given their recent revision this week. And we're going to continue to work with them over the next few days on some outstanding questions we have, and based on some information that we may hear today. So just to reiterate, the delta we're talking about between the revised county target and MSD's revised request is about $2.8 million out of the $124 million recommended revised budget by MSD. With that, I'm happy to answer questions, but I'm also going to look to the team back there to maybe move up a little closer, so if there are specific questions for them as well.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, Madam President, you were saying the 124 that MSD is okay with. Now, where is administration? I know we basically have to vote, on it, but what is your recommendation? Because you did make a recommendation before.
We're still working with MSD on that for a few outstanding questions. So we will definitely bring forth a firm recommendation no later than Tuesday.
After the, okay.
Thank you. We do have some speakers cards. I don't know if they're related to the operating budget or the CIP, so I'm going to hold for just a second with your deference on the speakers cards. I want to ask just a couple questions, Diana, related to the operating budget. And as you said, you look at the pie chart, and debt service, is what it is. SBU is being funded as it was last year, with the knowledge that if we need an increase there as we go, and if rain events are more torrential than they were last year, then we may have to do that. But at this moment in time, we're going to hold fast and hope that that doesn't happen. So those two I've got check marks by, because those are what they are. I've just got a couple questions, and this I expect will be an ongoing dialogue. I know that county staff, city staff have been working hard to try to get us closer to a number we can all agree to, and I too want to thank county staff in particular and city staff for working hard to get us there. Just a couple brief questions as we kind of move through this process for today. I expect there will be more questions next week. But on the personnel side, you mentioned that, and we've been looking at these personnel numbers and the staffing numbers, and so you mentioned additional personnel for new facilities that need to be staffed. Help us understand, are the new facilities additional facilities, or are there new facilities coming online replacing old facilities, and so there's more of a balance as opposed to new facilities being additional all the time?
Yes, for the most part, these are, we have a few new facilities that have come online for the first time. So Fort Scott is an actual treatment plant that was built by a development that has now been turned over to MSD to operate and manage, and it's now operational as of, it's about 6 months ago. It's a small packaged plant, but it is a permitted wastewater treatment facility, so it requires an operator of record assigned to that plant. We then also have the wet weather facilities. So the work in Westbourne, for example, that at the end of phase one, that's one of our new large wet weather facilities that is now operational. The wet weather facilities do not require an operator to be there during dry weather, but you do have needs to be, maintaining these, checking on them even during dry weather, and of course during wet weather, they do have to have personnel there, and so they take resources away from the traditional treatment plants that are staffed 24/7. So work in Westbourne is the largest one that came online, but we also have these real-time control facilities that require people going out there and checking them and working on the mechanicals and such. In addition to upgrades to pump stations and really the older pump stations requiring a fair amount of effort and personnel to deal with those. So I would say, generally speaking, this is new facilities and new assets that require people to be assigned to them.
And so, as we've talked to staff about because to my view, the healthcare costs and some of the other personnel costs, the cost of living increase kind of things, are not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to these additional staffing positions, knowing that some of them went unfilled last year, and trying to get a better understanding of the need there. I know there's been some conversation about safety and about what is required to have safe levels that are, we also want to be within the regulations, and so we don't want to run afoul of that. And so I would like to get, and I don't know if you can do it today, but kind of if I were to look at the table of organization and say some of the staffing went unfilled, and so my expectation is that those weren't related to safety necessarily, or my expectation is they would have been filled quickly were they related to safety. So I just would like to get a little bit more clarity, maybe on Tuesday, as to the TO, the safety positions that we're talking about, when we talk about some additional positions, and how that plays out in the table of organization to help us better understand and try to square the request from the city versus the allocation from the county. And I'm asking, I guess, if you could provide that for us on Tuesday so that we can flush out the 25 that are being requested in addition to the ones that went unfilled during the current budget cycle.
Sure, and I'd be happy to bring additional information on Tuesday and try to respond directly to that. But one thing that I may have kind of jumped over earlier is, as you said, it's the healthcare increases are what they are and the COLA are what they are. We really can't do much with those. So.
I mean, we could, but we
could, right. I was going to say, we're not.
it's been difficult. But anyway,
So,
yeah.
so
Gotcha.
we're setting that aside for the purposes of this discussion. So what we had proposed was an increase of about 2.2 million, which it was justified by these 25 positions, but we've been discussing increasing our vacancy credit. So we always have a number of positions that are not we don't anticipate ever filling all of the positions throughout the year. So we proposed increasing our vacancy credit so that the real increase, the net increase, if you will, would be just 1.2 million for additional staff. And as I was discussing this and we were trying to make it clear and understand this instead of focusing on the number 25 or not, I think it is important to note that that is not enough funding to fund 25 positions in 1 year. That's more like 15. And so it's comparable to currently the funding we have is not enough for 640 positions. It is, somewhat significantly less than that because we used all of our personnel funding this year and we've only carried about 600 to 605. So I am trying to find a better way to illustrate this, but at the same time, the positions, if a position is identified and there's a critical need, we do have that flexibility. We have over 700, I believe the number is 728 positions on our TO. We've been holding quite a number of them unfunded, 100% unfunded, since 2016 or 2015, I believe, whereas we used to apply a general vacancy credit to that entire number. We instead went through and did a staffing plan and tried to identify really what the needs are and what it takes to fund the utility. I think that there's just been, since 2016, when that was done, there's been a number of changes in these additional facilities, and what we're trying to do is adjust that and allow ourselves the flexibility to not necessarily increase funding by 25 positions, but to allow ourselves the flexibility during the year to fill the positions that either become vacant through departures and retirements, or to fill the positions because they've been identified as needs through various things. So that's part of it. We've had a fair amount of turnover in terms of or changes in terms of our senior leadership. And our wastewater treatment superintendent, Andy Rossiter, who is not here today, has been working very hard and very diligently for the past year since he's been in that position. And I think that's a lot of where we've seen these, we really don't have the adequate staffing and maintenance and operations at some of the outlying plants, and that has been identified really since I've been in this role. I've been hearing that from the outlying plants. So it's somewhat of a catch-up, I think, as well. So it's not necessarily all attributed to changes that are taking place right now in 2020. So I think if you would, we did share, I don't know, a month or so ago, a TO with the county administration that identifies by not just division, but by work group. So for instance, an outlying plant, what positions are there and what positions are funded and what positions are vacant. And that might be helpful to look at if you have not already.
I will ask, I have not seen that, so I will ask county staff to provide it. Okay. Just a matter of kind of flushing out these numbers. And the overall objective is to keep rates as low as possible, and so the budget then as reasonable as possible, and that's what we're trying to get to here. I've got one other question. I don't want to belabor the point, but one other related to the non-personnel. You talked about how, and I've heard also about this, it's really asset management, where you're going and doing an assessment of the infrastructure, and I think that we would all agree that that's an important initiative, and we want to be supportive of that. You mentioned, though, that contractors are doing the work, and I'm wondering why contractors as opposed to MSD staff, and what the long-term plan is as you continue to do more of that kind of work.
Sure, that's a very good question. We actually have both. So, and I'm not sure that I'm confident that I'm going to say correctly what is done by contractor staff and what is done by in-house staff, but we certainly, and that whole division is supervised, and the results of that data that is collected, for example, through a sonar type investigation is all evaluated and considered and planned for by MSD staff, but some of the actual investigation of that work. And am I speaking correctly about that, Mary Lynn? And so I don't know if it's due to the technology, depending on the types of sewers. So we have large diameter sewers and small diameter sewers, and some you can put cameras in, and some you use laser and sonar. So it's really dependent on the type of work, whether or not it is specialized contracted work or MSD in-house labor. And I believe we might even have a position, one of the positions that we want to fill is related to bringing more of this in-house, this technology,
My understanding is there's some cost savings there, so I just
Yes.
wanted to run that to ground. Okay, any additional?
Yeah, Madam President,
Yeah.
you asked exactly what I wanted to know about the table of organization. And also, can you designate the critical positions on that table of organization? That would be helpful to me. And then you originally had started at 130 million and went down to 124. Can you just give me, before Tuesday, of course, a summary of how you were able to delete 6 million, almost 6 million from your request? And I'm sure it's in here if I add up everything, but if I can just get a brief summary of how that happened. And we all know we have to work within our budget. We can't have everything that we need, pie in the sky sort of requests. We want to make sure those critical positions are filled, as long as we can't do it in-house, as you were saying. And is there any proposal to maybe train people that you currently have to be able to do what those contractors are doing? As Madam President was saying, it certainly would save a lot of money that way. I know there are certain expertise that you have to have, but is there a plan in the future to make that happen?
Sure, we do have plans for that, and I'd be happy to bring a little bit more detail on that in terms of the types of work that we think would be more efficient to do in-house if we could bring the staff in.
Okay.
So some of those specifics, I think it would be better if I prepare those in
Sure.
response to your question, and I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, before Tuesday.
Before Tuesday,
I'd like to
yes.
read it before,
We can do
okay?
that even tomorrow.
Thanks,
Very
I
good.
appreciate it.
Okay.
Let me pause here for a
Uh-huh.
second. As I said, we've got a number of speakers' cards. I don't know if they're related to the operating budget or the CIP, but I want to give folks the opportunity either to weigh in now or to wait until we hear the CIP budget brought forward. So there are 4 speakers' cards. If you would like to speak now, I've got Marilyn, Elder, Florence, and Kevin. Or if you'd like to wait until we get the CIP, that would be, so anybody want to come forward now? Marilyn? Yep, okay.
Okay. Give me a break.
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, actually, we have a CIP. MSD brought copies. We got copies online. I know it wasn't on the county site, but we certainly have big questions about it, like where's the Phase 2 plan?
So we're going to do the CIP, that conversation after this one.
This is supposed to be I'm sorry.
No,
this is
we
supposed
are.
to be-
We're going to do it. I just want to give people an opportunity to weigh in on the operating side before we got to the CIP.
Well, we'd like to weigh in on that
So-
next week.
Okay, okay.
Okay? I
Very
mean,
good.
you didn't segregate what the,
No, we're going to do it all today. I
We have a hearing.
wanted to let people have an opportunity to weigh in the operating budget today before we get to the CIP, which will also happen today.
well, can we weigh in on the rates then?
I'm sorry?
Can we weigh in on the rates then?
Sure.
Thank you. We do not see how we can support a rate increase. The rate structure itself is inequitable. It still has not been fixed, and we feel that it's essential. We've been talking about this for years and years and years, that we believe it's essential to actually get that done first. The city and the county have spent millions fighting each other, fighting the EPA, fighting the Sierra Club. Ratepayers should not be spending millions and millions of dollars on lawsuits and litigation. They should be spending the money on the fixing the sewers, fixing the treatment plants, stopping the basement backups. It's been a long time since the county has gone out for bonds. That is part of the operating budget, this debt service on them. The 2017, the city and county wanted the commitment letter urgently approved because you wanted to go out for bonds, but you didn't. You haven't gone out for bonds since then either. Money's been sitting in the bank on hand to be spent for projects. Ratepayers are paying interest on this money, yet we are not getting the benefit from these particular projects. We need a lot more transparency, accountability from the MSD. It's gotten more difficult to get information from MSD, which is kind of amazing, and we would like to see we would like to see the emphasis on the consent decree drastically improved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I ask you a question, Madam President? You said it's been more difficult to get information when you call. What process are you using?
We normally send a letter to MSD, and then either don't get the information or we get back responses like they didn't have any records for the CIP. I mean, it's
Who's your contact person when you write your letter?
Diana Christie.
Okay, so we'll make sure that we take care of that.
Thank you, Marilyn. All right, do you want to come forward now? Okay. This is Florence Miller.
Yes, I'm Florence Miller.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. And I'm a member of Communities United for Action. I mean, we've had an opportunity to look at the budget, and we're seeing that $278 million has been like revenue that's supposed to be projected, and $222 million is the budget request, and there's a difference of this $56 million. What does that $56 million mean, and what is it detailed in, and where does it go, or is this just some, random number? So can you give us, some kind of an explanation about that?
We'll have MSD come up and address your question.
Oh, okay. And then I'll have one for the capital improvement project later. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, why don't we hold then on speakers until after the next portion with the CIP. Diana, is there a response to the question? Yeah, thank you. Please come forward.
If we want to get into greater detail, EHUB could explain this, but generally speaking, that would be the cash financing that goes into funding for the capital projects that we fund each year.
Yeah, we've moved into the CIP already.
Yep.
So let's
I
just
thought you
move
wanted me
into
to
the
respond.
CIP, shall we?
Okay.
Yeah, so if you could provide us with the overview of the
Yes.
CIP. Thank you.
Yes. So the CIP this year is, as usual, it is a 5-year program, and so that would be 2020 through 2024. The 5-year program budgets funds with the balance of consent decree projects, including planning, design, engineering, and construction, asset management projects, again, including planning, engineering, and construction, and capital funding of ongoing asset renewal and maintenance of critical operations. It's important to note that only the 2020 CIP requests funds for appropriation. The outlying year's budgets, 2021 through 2024 this year, are for information and planning purposes and do not require specific and individual legislative action or approval at this time. That's okay. That wasn't 2 minutes already, was it? It is... we do recognize that the CIP was shared this year with the county in November. I believe it was the first week of November, and a draft was posted along with the operating budget on our website for review and public comment after we provided notice of this public hearing. So it has been available for a week or two now. So the 2020 CIP and the draft that has been delivered and provided in this book has a total cost of $169 million projects for 2020. $169 million on 65 projects in 2020. That includes nearly $63 million in consent decree spending. As with the operating budget, though, we have been working closely with the county team, and in addition to continuing to identify and refine the budget ourselves, and while not available today for review, it is likely that by Tuesday we would be able to share some additional savings to bring this 2020 CIP to an amount close to or just under $130 million. One of the key savings that has been identified, and it's our understanding that the Commission does agree with this, is that there is a project, a $27 million project that we have provided legislation for and that will be advanced next week. So that is a significant savings for the 2020 budget and is not an impact to this year due to other deferred projects. We have found other savings, again, working with the county and our own team, we determined that we could complete planning in 2020 and defer design on a number of our conveyance projects under the asset management section, and this amounts to another almost $12 million in savings. So while today we are discussing a total of $169 million, again, we believe that these continued efforts and work with the county has led us to being in a position likely by Monday to share those revisions for the next hearing. I would like to, though, go through the aspects of the CIP. Again, we have generally 3 types of projects. As you will note, the consent decree projects are in 2020 and not in the later years. And then we have asset management and then a category of other projects. So in particular, the consent decree projects, also known as the WIP Phase 2 projects, are not in the MSD submittal. This is for a few reasons. So for 2020, one in response to the county's memo with the target spending for consent decree for 2020, it was limited to $50.2 million. And current obligations under the consent decree for the bridge work amounts to $62.8 million in 2020. That's to satisfy the bridge construction projects that are underway, Phase 1 compliance assurance work, and additional capital needs for SBU mitigation. For that reason, MSD did not include any Phase 2 projects in 2020. In addition, for the out years, for 2021 and 2024, because a Phase 2 schedule has not yet been determined, the projects and costs listed for these out years exclude all consent decree work and only reflect known reinvestment needs required to keep existing assets in operation in accordance with the required level of service. We would like to note that the county Phase 2A plan submitted in 2018 has not been accepted by the regulators, and likewise the regulators proposed a Phase 2A plan earlier this year, and that plan is really has not been agreed upon by the city or the county. In our view, both plans have flaws in project schedules, budgets, and technical assumptions, and we continue to evaluate and validate projects so that a Phase 2 plan can be implemented most effectively when this dispute and a negotiation about a Phase 2 plan can be resolved. As I mentioned, both 2020 and the out years then focus on the asset management work. Asset management are projects that reinvest in existing utility assets by replacing, upgrading, or rehabilitating a failed asset or a failing asset or an asset that no longer meets the required level of service. So these projects include new sewer construction, sewer relining, and work at treatment facilities that's required to meet permits. We have many, many aging sewers, and our treatment plants are reaching 60 and 70 years old. So our asset management needs continue to grow. As we have deferred things in based on Phase 1 and additional constraints from affordability, these asset management projects, as they continue to be deferred, impact our operating budget. Again, MSD's focus then is on the asset management projects, and we will have to react and complete consent decree projects as those projects are agreed upon by all parties. The 2020 budget request for asset management is $84.9 million for planning, design, and construction. That, again, is prior to those reductions that we have since identified. These include collection system projects, proposed treatment plant projects, and in particular, we have incorporated recommendations of a recently completed solids handling master plan, which is the culmination of a 2-year collaborative effort with the county to identify long and short-term needs of MSD as it relates to our solids processing, solids disposal, and odor control. I would like to note that our odor complaints from 2019 have been are almost 45% lower than they were in 2018. So we are seeing the benefits of these investments in our solids handling, and I know that this new work will continue to improve those systems. The important projects that we've identified to begin in 2020 is design funding for odor control for sludge dewatering at Mill Creek, an anaerobic digestion facility, so the design for that at Little Miami, and solids handling process and odor control upgrades at Muddy Creek, Polk Run, and Sycamore Creek. In addition to the specific defined project requests in the budget, capital allowances are utilized to address prioritized asset management work that does not require significant time or resources for planning or design. So these are projects that we can just go out and contract for the construction. These include sewer relining and rehabilitation in the collection system. So that's really the projects that result from those condition assessments that we do. Then within the treatment facilities, we use the allowances to purchase and install small equipment such as pumps, heating and conditioning units, and electrical equipment. There's a category of other projects that you will see that are not asset management or WIP. These include our program contingency. This is projects, our construction projects do not include any contingency, so we utilize the program contingency for construction change orders. We have an MSD labor allowance. This is new in 2020. We will be using a common allowance to charge employee labor costs for work done in capital projects. We think this will free up our engineers to not have to worry about billing their time, and it will be, I think, more standardized. So this is a cost-neutral budget item for 2020. It's just a shift in how we track that. And then program management is another category, and our program management is this effort that we are undertaking with expert staff for ongoing project controls, including scheduling, cost estimating, and KPI reporting. It is our intention that this program management will be, the efforts of this will be seen in 2020, and that this will help us provide more transparency through accurate, and both to the board and the public, through accurate and timely reporting of program and project performance. And with that, other than actually going through the numbers, I think that is essentially my summary of the capital improvement program. And I do have a few quick comments about the rates, if you'd like me to just finish that up.
Sure.
Or do you want to add? Okay. As presented for this public hearing as well, MSD is proposing that the board approve a 1% revenue increase. It is for 2020, and this 1% is what we recommend in 2020 is what we recommended based on a rate study last year that has continued and identifies this need for additional revenue. Our 2020 revenue increase is not driven by an immediate need for additional revenue per se, but it's rather the need to avoid failure, to avoid a fairly significant decline in debt service coverage, and to allow us to project future revenue increases, avoiding a more significant increase in a future year. So essentially, we are recommending this very small but important 1% increase take place in 2020 to avoid a larger increase in future years. This is pursuant to in terms of maintaining our debt service coverage, that's pursuant to our financial manual, and it is trending as though if we do not have any rate increase in 2020, that we will be below coverage recommendations. The rate increase is also recommended due to the uncertainty regarding the timing and magnitude of projects under a Phase 2A, and MSD needs to remain financially stable with significant reserves of debt service coverage. As mentioned, it is possible that MSD will need to go to the bond market, and with undue concern about a rating downgrade, it's been our recommendation that this year would see the 1% increase. The legislation presented does calculate that and show how what the rates would look like, and I would like to add that generally speaking, the average sewer customer pays $600 a year, so a 1% rate increase amounts to $6 over the entire year. And with that, I'm finished with my comments.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Holly, I'm going to ask you to come forward again.
Thank you. Again, reiterating some comments from Diana's. As mentioned, the MSD's capital improvement program consists of a few parts. One is capital projects, largely the projects for the federal consent decrees wet weather improvement plan, and the second is asset management projects. These are projects that improve portions of the collection and treatment facilities and complement the investments made by the WIP projects. During 2019, MSD has been implementing a series of consent decree projects that bridge between the end of Phase 1 and the beginning of Phase 2. Not all those projects were completed as scheduled, and that work will continue in 2020. In May, the county did, similar to the operating budget, request that MSD prepare the asset management section of the CIP and align the WIP section with the county's Phase 2A plan that was submitted to the regulators in June of 2018. We also included guidance in that that required, with a goal of a 0% rate increase for 2020. In November, as Diana mentioned, MSD did submit their proposed CIP. It contained asset management and unfinished bridge projects. It did not include the county's Phase 2A plan, as mentioned, and it exceeded the county's budget guidance. And of course, as Diana just mentioned, there is a proposed rate-setting legislation of 1% in 2020. So because of this, and as Diana mentioned, the county team, again, led by Joe and Karen and Jeff Proctor, have been working with MSD as we are quickly providing and developing a county-modified CIP plan in order to meet the goals that were set out. We are continue to work closely with MSD on that, as Diana mentioned, and we hope to have our modified document posted at the latest Monday. I will say again, the county worked very closely and transparently with MSD on this modified CIP, and I think they've met, I don't know, several hours. I'm looking at both to work through this and talk through that. We will say that the limited time that the county team was developing this didn't allow for some of the project fact sheets to be completed, so we'll be, as we move forward with this project, just so everyone is clear, we'll be asking and directing MSD to meet with the county to complete those missing project fact sheets before January 20th. So the county modified CIP will conform with the budget limits established in the county's Phase 2A plan, and therefore there is no recommended rate increase for 2020. But I will say again, we're working closely with MSD, as Diana mentioned, to really provide an aligned CIP, hopefully at the latest by Monday. With that, I want to turn over specific questions. I think you all know Joe Graff and Karen Ball. If there's specific questions on the county side related to the CIP, I wanted to divert to those two.
Thank you. Diana, I just have a quick question for you. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I do want to delve in a little bit so we've got enough information, particularly moving into the next public hearing. So when you talk about the CIP, asset management and capital improvements related to consent decree and the bridge projects, and some of the bridge projects were not completed in 19 and are now moving into 20. How many? And just by matter of degree, I think it would be helpful for us to have a better understanding of that.
Yes, to be clear, the bridge projects included milestones that initially that were both 2019 and 2020. So even though it was a one-year bridge time period, the understanding was that a fair amount of the construction was going to be completed in 2020. So that being said, there are 4 or 5 projects that are delayed beyond what that milestone was, and we have been working both with the county and the regulators and reporting that information. The delays have primarily been due to the lack of planning and development of these projects because of pursuing it through a bridge. We did not have right-of-way established, and so we had to start kind of late, and so that has been a bit of a backlog. We do have one project, as you know, that has been held up, which is the Upper Muddy Creek Interceptor, which is due to design questions from the board. But generally speaking, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it 4 or 5 of the projects is all that are behind schedule? 4 or 5 because of yeah. So again, the bridge was anticipated always, and some of the milestones are in 2020. That construction was intended to carry over into 2020.
I hear you saying that some of it was intended to and some of it wasn't.
Yes.
So, yeah,
yes. We've been tracking that and reporting that.
Yeah.
And I can bring that. That schedule.
So we have a better sense of the bridge projects, where they are now, what the status is, how some of them are moving into 2020, whether they were intended to or not. I think would be really helpful information for us.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
I have a couple
yes.
questions.
Yep.
Are you through?
I have one more, but,
Okay,
but
good.
not
No.
for Diana. So go ahead.
Okay, Diana. As I look at your booklet, the CIP projects, are they consistent, are these projects consistent with the City of Cincinnati's projects and the level of priority? in cost? Is it, so if I go to the city of Cincinnati, will I see this same list that we have as relates to priority?
So are you referring to the Phase 2, the city's Phase 2?
I'm referring to
that was-
page 10 and 11. I'm referring to page 6, not necessarily page 6, but 10 and 11, and 12.
Well, if I understand you correctly, so the CIP that we presented is being presented by MSD, on behalf of MSD. There is no other
Are they in
city.
priority or anything here?
Well, I'm sorry, what?
Is there a priority list on projects?
Well, just by year. So for 2020, the asset management projects that are in 2020, there's no separate prioritization other than our own. We do internally have a schedule as to when they would begin. And then so for 2021 and the out years, the prioritization is generally the asset management projects that we want to bring forward each year. So that's really, it's annual prioritization.
I know you're like not understanding me.
Okay.
So since I've been here, my understanding is some of our priorities are not the same as a city as it relates to which ones you should get to first, which ones should be on the top of the list. So is our priority list the same as the city's? As far as getting them done?
This book that has been presented does not include any of what the city's Phase 2 projects were.
I'm just
So
asking
they're not
in
in here at
general.
all. So we did, then that, by not including the Phase 2, I think it's actually silent on that. So there's no conflicting city or county Phase 2 projects in our proposed book at this time.
Okay, so let me ask another question. I noticed, if I was just a resident and I'm looking at this, we have all this City of Cincinnati symbols. I don't see any Hamilton County, and you're coming to us with monies. I know this is for the greater Cincinnati projects, goes all the way out to Pleasant Run where I'm out that area. But there's no indication really that Hamilton, why don't we have a Hamilton County symbol with all these City of Cincinnati symbols? I'm asking. Why don't we have a narrative summary to explain our role in the county as it relates to these capital improvement programs? I see you have an executive summary, but I think it would be really good if we had a narrative summary of our role that we play in this development project. So I don't know who developed it, but I would not even know that the county was really even involved if you looked at this booklet. Other than the inappropriate memo that was put in here by our administrator, the fact that he sent it to you about the decree and that we could only go to 51 million, it should be 61 million. I don't know if that was appropriate to be in there, but it is in there. That's the first time I saw something about Hamilton County in this entire book. And we are the lead agency in MSD. So I think it needs to show us in here somewhere. Just like you put the City of Cincinnati.
So,
put a little symbol for Hamilton County and a little narrative about our role in MSD and the CIP projects.
so
I'd
if I
appreciate
could
that.
quickly, sure, I think it's important though to note that the Metropolitan Sewer District of Greater Cincinnati is a county sewer district that is operated and managed by the City of Cincinnati per the 1968 agreement. It has an identity in and of itself that has carried this city logo, but it is the Metropolitan Sewer District of Greater Cincinnati, and the City of Cincinnati, and those of us that work there manage this utility. And the dollars that we're talking about here are not county funds, they are ratepayer funds that, they're the public dollars that we're entrusted to maintain. So I just want to be clear that that logo was approved years ago, and if there is an identity issue with that, that's kind of outside of the capital program.
You did indicate what Jeff had said and put his memo, and so you did put some Hamilton County information in there. Put something in there about Hamilton County and our role. I would like to see that, because as you read it as a resident, you would not even know that we have a role in this at all, which we do, don't we?
Well,
No?
the sewer district itself is a county sewer district. If the issue is with the logo, that's really,
No, it's
I'm not
more
in
than
a
a logo,
position
it's a
to change
concept.
that.
It's a concept, and I know how it's been for years. That doesn't mean that we don't need to change things and let people know the full scope of how Hamilton County Fault is in play with this. Because we have a lot to do with this, and I think it needs to be indicated.
Thank you.
All right.
What does that mean? So are you going to maybe take a look at it and see how you can incorporate some Hamilton County information?
I guess I'm reluctant to discuss the relationship of the parties in the budget book. I think the budget book is about the budget for the Metropolitan Sewer District, and we really actually like to keep it to that and not get into the, again, this is the management of MS, this is our recommendation to the board, this is the book that we put together as the manager of the utility, and I'm not quite sure, other than noting that it's the board's obligation to approve this budget, and it is presented to
Well,
the Board
you
of
can
County
note that.
Commissioners.
That
So
would
I
be
could
great.
add that.
That would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, though, the legislation that was provided earlier this week is our submittal, and the legislation is very clear about the roles of the parties. And so this is kind of more for consumption,
I know what a
public,
budget is
whereas
for.
the legislation, I think, describes the roles of the
But
parties.
we have to approve it, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it needs to be put in there so people know it.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. I just want to briefly reference also the rate increase that was recommended by MSD. We have a task force related to the impervious surface fee, and I think that's really important work that may impact the amount of dollars that come into the utility, and so I do think it's premature to have any kind of rate increase at this moment in time before we get any resolution of one of the most important recommendations from the Affordability Task Force. So I think I would not be ready to advocate for any kind of increase. I understand the rationale behind it. I simply think it's premature because we've got this task force together. We've got a very broad group of people looking at that recommendation, and I think we need to pay some attention to that. So that's my take on
agree.
the rate increase. All right, so we have speakers cards. Let's get to the speakers cards. Karen, I am going to have a question for you in a minute, but hold the phone. All right, so Elder Danelle Reglin, are you still here? There we are. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam President and Commissioners. I want to speak briefly on the sewage backup program. Now, Community Under for Action, better known as CUFA, we understand and we know that climate change is not going to stop. We also know that sewer backup is not going to stop. I am happy to hear and see that Madam President and the commissioners are now asking some very important questions and would like to see some things more in detail. Well, CUFA, along with the ratepayers, we would like to see things more in detail. I don't understand, we've been putting our heads together, and I just can't understand that how are we going to fix the problem, the sewage backup problem? 2018, 2019, they had an operating budget for 2018 at 13, and then for 2019, 14, but for 2020, it's a big decrease in that. They only asking for 10. If they couldn't get the job done with that much money, how are they going to get it done with 10? And that is a concern for CUFA and the ratepayers. So we would like for someone to give us a little more detail on how they're going to get that job done. And if they can't answer it today, we'll be happy to meet with them before the next meeting. We need this information before the next meeting because at that meeting, that's when the budget is going to be decided. I think that's about it. We are concerned definitely about that, and we are open to meetings, or hopefully we can get the the answer today or before.
Can I ask you a favor then?
Sure.
Would you mind just putting that just in, 2 sentences long, and if you offer it to the commission, we're happy to follow up on that.
Sure.
We've got another public hearing on Tuesday, and so we can ask that the information be provided at that public hearing.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you, I appreciate that. And if you, Victoria is here, and Paul Sohi's here, Fatima, if you're listening, come on into the room. And so, we'll make sure that we understand the question and get the response by Tuesday.
Sure.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks.
Madam President, if I
yes.
could just very briefly, because I think Director Christie hit on this just a bit earlier as it relates to the SBU budget, and if this doesn't directly answer the problem, I apologize, we'll follow up, but I'll just keep this brief, that the SBU budget is typically set, it's a very intermittent allocation in the budget that varies widely depending upon what type of wet weather events we have in the community. So we always have a little bit of a back and forth and a tension between, not a frictional tension, but a healthy tension about how we budget the SBU program, not wanting to budget it too high, also not wanting it to budget it too low, because we just never know what number is actually going to be hit. So we set a number. I think the Board of County Commissioners has said quite fervently that if MSD ever needs dollars to respond to an SBU event, they can come back and we will allocate those dollars at the time, as opposed to setting a budget at a level that ultimately isn't used. So I think that's probably part of the dynamic here. Is it does show a drop off from 13 million to 9, but that's not that does not signify the board's lack of intent to fund that adequately, whatever it is, based upon whatever storm events and wet weather events happen next year.
Right, and we've done that in the past, and I'm sorry if I misunderstood the question. So, thank you, Fatima, for being in the room. Yeah, we budget it, we go over sometimes because of rain events, we add additional dollars upon request, and we fund the program. So I don't think we've ever been in a position where we weren't funding the program upon the request. So I apologize if I misunderstood what the question was, but that's always been the policy of the board. And Fatima, my legislative aide, is in the room, so if anybody has any questions or needs to contact, she's right in the back. Kevin Hanghold is our next speaker. Welcome.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll be short because I was writing this at midnight last night. And to that point, this budget needs to be released a lot earlier than it was. There's no way to comprehensively analyze and prepare comments on the documents of this size and this time frame. And if you're going to vote on the budget next week, there really isn't time to meaningfully incorporate comments you hear today and Tuesday into what you'll vote on. And now I hear we're not going to see a lot of the CIP stuff until Monday. I mean, it seems like you really don't want any public comment or public feedback, from my perspective. So there's a lot of points to touch on in the budget. The fact that MSD has no plans to implement on phase 2 of the consent decree, to the woefully inadequate sewer backup response, to the fact that CAP needs to be expanded to include renters, which you could do right now. But instead, I'm going to focus on the regressive rate structure and how there's no need to increase rates by a penny, let alone 1%. And I am glad to hear that you are in favor of not increasing the rates. So I'm working off of 2014 data because I couldn't get a more recent data request approved. And it is annual data, not monthly data. So there's some assumptions in the calculations, but I think we can still see a pretty clear point coming through this. So MSD brought in about $240 million in 2014. And as I've commented in front of you before, MSD has a declining block rate structure. So that means that high users get high discounts, about 20% in fact. This amounts to a large subsidy for large users. Because I only had annual data, I had to assume equal contribution or equal consumptions for every month. But doing that, I calculated the magnitude of the subsidy given to larger customers, which is $17 million. Notably, that's only 4,200 customers, or less than 2% of all customers that receive any subsidy. And the biggest one I found was nearly $500,000, so fun fact. I sent in a data request on the November 27th, asking for any justification MSD has for using a declining block tariff. You all are really quick at these data requests usually, but I haven't got anything yet. So I can only assume that this isn't based in rate design theory or cost causation, that it's just a giveaway to large customers. So it's so big that it's over 7% of the total revenue received. So before you raise another cent from small residential customers who can't afford their sewer bills, take it from the large users who have been freeloading for years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Florence, I think you had probably a minute or more left on your time. Did you want to come up and comment to the CIP? I didn't mean to cut you off earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wondered that, how do you raise this money for the CIP Is this raised by bonds, and how do you raise it each year, and how much is allocated each year?
Diana, you want to, so the ratepayer dollars going into the utility to provide for the operating and the capital budget.
Right, that 56 million, you said that goes into the capital improvement projects, and then, but I guess the 168 is the capital improvement
Can you come forward?
budget. So how is this money raised each year, other than bonds? Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to have Ehab help explain that one, because I might not do it as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Ehab Tadros, Deputy Director and CFO, for another day or so. Mainly MSD fund its capital project using three sources. One is cash funding, which is 56 or so. You refer to the difference between the revenue, annual revenue, and annual expenditure. We always have this room, so we move this money to our construction fund. Also, another source of funding our capital project is OWDA loans. This is low interest rate. We try to get as much of the low interest rate benefiting our ratepayers. And the third source is going to the bond market and to borrow more money. And we didn't go to the bond market to get new money, I believe, since 2013, maybe, or maybe before. Maybe, 2013. We didn't get new money, so we're relying on cash funding and OWDA loans. And maybe we share that with the county team, that we may need to go to the bond market sometime soon, maybe within a year or two. Talking about bond, I would like to reference something and recognize it now that we recently, the county led and coordinate bond refinancing, one of our existing bond, thanks to county administration, John Brogan, the budget director, who coordinates the effort, which resulted in MSD having a saving of about 23 million just by refinancing existing debt from 2009.
Yeah, we just did that.
Yeah, we just did.
Recently, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you for your response. Marilyn, did you have any comment?
Yes, thank you. I just want to clarify, first of all, the MSD does not have a Phase 2 plan in the CIP, partly because of the county memo, the bridge projects, and because you don't have an agreed-to plan. But does the county agree with that?
We are in the midst of a process, Marilyn, and so we are taking that under consideration. The question was, the Phase 2A projects aren't included because there isn't an agreement between the city and the county as to what those projects should be, so they're not included in the CIP. The question becomes then, is that okay? So I understand the question, and we're in the middle of a process right now.
That process being you're adding projects to the CIP
And the
for
vote,
next week?
the vote will come on Thursday of next week.
So we don't actually have the full CIP to even comment upon at this point in time.
We have the county's version of the CIP, or the city's version, MSD's version of the
city's
CIP
version.
in front of us.
But, so what plan are you planning to include in the CIP? The county's plan?
So,
The imposed plan? the
again,
city's plan?
I'm not prepared to comment on that right now, but we're in the middle of this process. We're gathering information at our first public hearing about this, and so that's what is in front of us today for consideration.
Okay, what about sewer backup plans to prevent basement backups onto people's property? There's only one project in the entire CIP in 2020 to address basement backup prevention.
Okay, also, yes, I appreciate the comments. We're studying all of this still, and we're in the middle of the process right now.
Okay, well, I just find it's just kind of astonishing to have a public hearing before you have all the information. I mean, it was less than 2 weeks that we even had this MSD version. This is just not an appropriate way to put information in front of the public. It's really denying people the right to really.
Marilyn, it's safe to say that it's been very challenging when we're not given adequate information all the time. And so we are working through the process. It's been very challenging, and we are taking what we have in front of us now into consideration. So I appreciate your comments. We share your frustration, and we're trying to work through it.
Could I also ask about the MSD labor capital project? To date, you have not been including MSD labor in the reporting and in the capital budget. Is that right?
Previously, it was.
Can you
You're
go
gonna
to the
come up
mic,
to the microphone, yeah.
since we work for them?
So previously, MSD billed labor to individual projects, and we did this, I don't know if it was at the end of the year one time, but project dollars were allocated, capital dollars were allocated, so portions of the employees' salaries were paid from projects. We're just doing that now as a single allowance instead of by project, but it's the same dollar amount. It's just, instead of allocating it by project, it's all allocated to one allowance. And then it will still be, those dollars will still financially later be moved onto individual projects. So it's just a change in the accounting. It's not an increase or a decrease in how we've done that in the past.
Were you saying you've put them into you've charged them in the past, the capital projects?
Correct.
Whereas their salaries have been in the operating budget?
Their salaries are not 100% funded out of the operating budget. So there is a portion of certain salaries that are funded out of the capital projects, and that they bill their time to projects, and MSD labor is a budgeted portion of each project when those funds are appropriated by the board.
Thank you.
It has been in the past.
Thank you.
Report on just how much has been spent?
Sure, I believe we have all that. Yes, we can share that report.
Thank you. Just, I neglected to say the obvious, which is we are in litigation with the city related to the structure of MSD and some of the Phase 2A projects that, is the overview moving into a budget process where we have to come to some conclusion in order to keep the utility running and the projects funded. And so we continue to be frustrated by the lack of resolution on the projects on Phase 2. We have the bridge in front of us. Some of those are continuing to be funded in 2020. We all understand that. However, there is an expectation that we have some resolution of that. So it's a difficult process. And so I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your frustration. But we are continuing to work through this and hope to have, we have to have a conclusion by the end of the year. So, thank you. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Karen, I have forgotten my question, so, oh, I know. Would you please come forward? We got an email from some of the residents on Stonebridge. So will you elaborate on where we will find that in this process?
We are also aware of the Stonebridge project, and as I can tell you today, it is in the capital budget that will come forward, funded for design and right-of-way. Working through the scope of that will be part of the next year's activities, and making sure that it once again doesn't push overflow downstream or cause problems elsewhere, and is looked at from all perspectives in terms of separation and anything else that we might be able to do with that alignment.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we are hoping to move forward then on the Stonebridge.
Yes, the total project cost estimate right now is $4.4 million.
All right, thank you. All right. Are there any other comments from anyone in the room that would like an opportunity to speak?
I have a comment, but I'll wait till you finish.
Okay. All right, so we are, as I said, in the middle of public hearings related to the CIP and the operating budget for MSD. We will continue this hearing, and I will make a motion that we continue the hearing to next Tuesday.
Second.
Second, it's the second public hearing on Tuesday.
Right, so you can conclude this one. All right, in that case, I will move that we conclude this one, knowing that we will take it back up again on Tuesday.
Second.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. We look forward to getting some information from MSD related to the questions that were brought forward. And we will have another robust hearing, I'm sure, on Tuesday. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. Appreciate your comments. Feel free to reach out anytime, and we can try to get information as we move through this. Thank you. So did you have a comment related to this Well, come on forward. We're going to have you fill out a speaker's card after you speak, so that we've got you on record. You've got the pleasure of the floor for 2 minutes.
My name is Kevin Farmer. Again, I have approached this board numerous of times when it comes to bill reform. Right now, I'm informed that right now there's a special project that when it comes down to starting in January that is taking place with the Public Defender's Office to pretty much find ways to really assess the valid risk assessment that judges are using, our municipal court judges are using when it comes to bill determination under their Rule 46 when it comes to their discretion. And my whole thing is finding ways to be able to expedite the process when it comes down to ProWare and the CMS system, what the Hamilton County has used when it comes to actually releasing people when bail is posted, because there's a lack of communication between the clerk of courts and the jail. So I have literally reached out to several municipal court judges when it comes down to finding a champion, in the reference of the words of Denise Driehaus, the Madam President, in regards to finding a solution to be able to make more fairness when it comes to bail, and also the process, the communication process with the CMS system. And what I was told through the AFTAB Purival is ProWare. So with that system, everybody agrees that that system is slow and it's malfunction, and it's useless, what I've been told. So I'm figuring out a way that if we can be able to update that system, and also figuring out ways to be able to make a fairness into the bail reform when it comes to that issue, because we know the city has issued out implemented their calls when it comes to that issue, and the county is pretty much, I guess, figuring out a way how to be able to do something about that, or so that's my issue, seeing where we stand from that.
Just by way of information, we do have a study underway to try to better understand what efficiencies we can accomplish over a particular inland courthouse related to bail reform and other issues. So that is underway right now.
Okay.
So we will hopefully have some conclusion within the next couple months.
Couple months? All right.
I just had a quick
Yes.
question. In January, what were you saying specifically is
Apparently,
going to happen?
I was told that Bill Gallagher and some others, the Public Defender's Office, are actually working together to be able to project to be able to start. I don't know who's funding it, but to release individuals under $5,000 for violent offenses, to be able to release some of that jail tension. Because I know if the jail gets capacitated, the next thing is lobbying for another one. So, and for that not to happen is to be able to release people who can't afford to pay bond.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are going to move to our consent agenda. Are there any questions related to items 1 through 7?
No questions.
I'm going to move that we approve of consent agenda items 1 through 7.
Second.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. The only other thing I have in front of me is an executive session. Jeff, is there anything else?
I believe that would be it. We do have an executive session, but nothing further aside from what's on the agenda.
All right, so I will then move that we go into executive session pursuant to RC Section 121.22G3 to conduct a conference with an attorney for the public body concerning pending litigation.
Second.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.